So yesterday I started the let's look at goalie histories. Go back to 1967. That's because there's only 6 teams that go beyond 1967, and none of them have any kind of goaltending factory sort of reputation going on. And during the original six era, goaltenders stayed put quite a bit. When a goaltender moved, it was kind of big news. The Vancouver Canucks, it's not big news when a goaltender moves because it's kind of a thing that happens all the time. And unlike Philly yesterday, I can't talk about any great tandem. The closest you get is Schneider and Luongo, who had 3 years together. But ask any Canuck fan, and they'll tell you it started out as okay, and then it got towards the end, it was uncomfortable because Schneider had passed Luongo in the eyes of most fans, including myself. But let's look at their history going all the way back. Their first year, it's Hodge and Wilson. So Charlie Hodge, Dunk Wilson. Dunk Wilson becomes the starter in year 2. Gardner's the backup. Year 3, Wilson's the starter still. Dick is the backup. So Dunk Wilson is taking a lot of abuse with the expansion Canucks and dealing with the travel of the expansion Canucks. 73-74, Gary Suitcase Smith comes in, plays 66 games. So again, much like yesterday with Philly, if a goaltender didn't play 20 games, I'm not putting him on the board. I'm only putting goalies on the board who played 20 or more games. Because stability in net, it can look crazy if you've got this guy with 1 game, this guy with 4, this guy with 3. That doesn't necessarily measure stability. That just measures who got injured. I want to measure stability in goal. 74-75, Gary Smith sets a record with 72 games played. So that's a Canucks record that will be in the books for quite a while. 75-76, Smith is the starter, Lockett, the backup. Then in 76-77, Smith is out. He had a rather messy breakup with the Canucks. Maniago and Ridley become your goaltenders. 77-78, Cesar Maniago and Kurt Ridley are your goaltenders again. So that's 2 years in a row with a tandem, which is right around the NHL, or the Canucks maximum. 78-79, it's Gary Bromley as the starter and Glenn Hanlon as the backup. Everybody always talks about Bromley and that mask with the skull. He wore it once in his entire career. 79-80, Glenn Hanlon, 57 games played. So his backup, which I'm pretty sure was still Bromley, didn't play enough games to qualify as 20. There were 3 guys that were in the mix for goaltender that year. 80-81, here comes Richard Brodeur. Gary Bromley's your backup. 81-82, Brodeur's the starter. Hanlon's the backup, and this is, of course, when the Canucks had that run to the Stanley Cup final. 82-83, Brodeur plays 58 games. Nobody else behind him plays more than 19. Garrett plays some games, though, and Garrett plays well. And Garrett ends up playing in the All-Star game in place of Richard Brodeur, who was injured. So rather than go, well, Richard Brodeur's injured, let's go out and find somebody else, Garrett went and played. And Garrett played pretty well. 83-84, Brodeur and Garrett are your goaltending tandem for the Vancouver Canucks. 84-85, Richard Brodeur and Frank Caprice. Caprice is on the board. Frank Caprice was in the Canucks organization for, I think it was six or 7 years. He was just strictly a backup. Had some scary numbers there too, but the Canucks had some scary teams. 85-86, it's Brodeur and Wendell Young. Wendell Young would go on to play pretty well for Pittsburgh and then end up in Tampa with their expansion team. 86-87, it's Brodeur and Caprice again. And 87-88, this kid Kirk McLean comes along, and he's the starter now, and Caprice is still the backup. So Caprice is on the board 3 times. 88-89, it's McLean and Steve Weeks. So if a goaltender's got the last name Weeks, he's played in Vancouver. 89-90, it's McLean and Weeks again, and honestly, that's one of my favorite tandems the Canucks ever had. That was a pretty solid tandem. And again, clear-cut starter, clear-cut backup, pretty good stats for both. 90-91, McLean, while injured, Troy Gamble takes over. And Gamble plays pretty well. And Gamble is easy to forget because concussions shortened his career. And it's too bad because Troy Gamble was a pretty damn good goaltender his first year. And I was very excited in 90-91. I had a bunch of his rookie card, and I was like, I'm like, this kid's going to be great. And then concussions ended that. So 91-92, Kirk McLean plays 65 games while they're looking for a backup. And because Gamble, once the concussions took over, he was just always injured. And when he played, he didn't seem right. 92-93, McLean and Whitmore is your goaltenders. And 93-94, it's still McLean and Whitmore. And the Canucks were so enamored with the McLean and Whitmore tandem that they got John Van Beesbroek so that Van Beesbroek would get taken in the expansion draft by the Florida Panthers. And then in 94-95, McLean plays almost every game. Because once Whitmore's game slipped, it was done. And McLean at 40 games because of the fact it was a 48-game schedule for a lockout. So 95-96, the Canucks get a new goaltender. McLean and Hirsch, and you want to talk about goaltenders with great masks. Corey Hirsch's Psycho mask is still probably my favorite of all time. It's up there. And I liked Hirsch a lot. 96-97, McLean and Hirsch again. And Hirsch was out playing McLean at points during that season. 97-98, it's Irbe and McLean. So that's an awkward one, isn't it? Because Archie was fantastic. So, of course, you got to get rid of Archer Irbe because they thought he was too short. For sure that was a Keenan call. 98-99, Gar Snow and Corey Hirsch. So Hirsch is back after 1 year off as a guy who got 20 games. 99-2000, this is where things get ugly. Potvin, Snow, and Weeks. So this is where the whole goalie graveyard thing starts, is right in here. And it's because there was an attention deficit disorder when it came to finding a goaltender, and the trades were too much. So you'd have a struggling goaltender like Snow, so you might move him out. You get a guy like Weeks. Weeks doesn't necessarily play very well, so you end up moving him out. Potvin comes in 2000-2001. Essens is technically the starter. He plays more games than Potvin. And Potvin finds his way out of town in 2001, 2002. You've got Kluche and Skudra. So you look from 98-99 to 2001-2002, and it's just a mess. And I still, to this day, feel that it's a general manager that was running it, that for whatever reason, it was something that Brian Burke struggled with, was finding that goaltender. After Kirk McLean fell off the map as a starter, and McLean went on to be a solid backup. And, he had a good run there in Florida and with the Rangers. But the Canucks looking for a starter. Irbe was the guy, but they didn't like him. So even though Irbe had the numbers, they didn't like him. Garth Snow, in that 98-99 season, Garth Snow was actually the MVP of the team. His team MVP is voted by the fans. Why? Because that team was, at that point, it had Messier, Bure, McGillney, and there was a feeling that there was just a lack of heart on the team. So even though Garth Snow wasn't a fantastic goaltender, he was the MVP that year for the Canucks. But within a year, he's out. And a year later, Essens is playing starting minutes. And a year later, you got Kluche brought in. And Dan Kluche's brought in from Tampa. Doesn't put up great numbers off the start, and Canuck fans were genuinely concerned. 02-03, it's Kluche and Skudra again. So you finally got some stability here. And then in 03-04, it's Kluche and Hedberg. Hedberg, very underrated goaltender for his time. I thought he was solid. 05-06, Alex Auld plays 67 games. Wasn't great, but honestly, considering that workload, he was okay. But then you have Dave Nonis come in and fix it. He goes out and gets Luongo. Auld is part of what he gave up to get Luongo. Luongo plays 76 games his first year in 06-07. Is the only reason the Canucks reached the Stanley Cup playoffs at all. In 07-08, he plays 73 games. So when people talk about how, Luongo struggled at points in the playoffs, I still think they overplayed him. He wasn't a Marty Brodeur. He wasn't a guy who could play 70-plus games, especially behind a defense that allowed a lot of shots. And I think, honestly, by the time they got into the second round, I think he was tired, and I think their defense got tired. Because, man, it was just brutal when they'd play Chicago. 08-09, Luongo's the only goalie with 20-plus games. He plays 54 that year. 2009-2010, Luongo and Raycroft. 2010-2011, it's Luongo and Schneider. 2011-2012, it's Luongo and Schneider. And again in 2012-2013. So that is as close to having a reliable tandem for a while that the Canucks have ever had. And then they blew it. Schneider gets moved. So Luongo and Lack are in there in 2013-14. Now, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Tortorella had to basically go and talk to Luongo and talk him into staying in Vancouver. After the Schneider trade, Luongo was not happy because he wanted out of Vancouver, and seeing Corey leave means he's staying. He wasn't happy about it. Then Eddie Lack is starting to get extra time on the ice that he feels he should get. There were starts going to Eddie Lack that Luongo felt he should have got, especially the Heritage game against the Ottawa Senators. And next thing you know, Luongo's on his way out of town. So it was an absolute disaster. They went within a year from having Schneider and Luongo as one of the best starting rotations in the league, because they're both starters, to not having either of them. 2014-15, Ryan Miller and Eddie Lack are your goaltending tandem. Markstrom that year cleared waivers. And somebody pointed out to me, said, oh, no, Markstrom was never on waivers. So I had to actually go and find the article. It was a smart move that was made in the 2014-15 season. That before we've even got into preseason, the Canucks throw Markstrom on waivers. The best time to waive a guy you don't want to lose is before they've started playing preseason and teams know what they've got. Because they're a lot less likely to bring somebody else on knowing they're going to have to cut somebody else. So Markstrom gets snuck through waivers, and in 2015-16, he backs up Miller. He backs up Miller again in 2016-17, and this past season, he was the starter, Nilsson the backup. This is their placeholder for Thatcher Demko. Thatcher Demko is the latest savior in the Vancouver Canucks net, and we'll see whether that works for them or not. The interesting thing is, if you look at the all-time great starters they've had, Brodeur was their starter for quite a while. Brodeur had 7 years of 20 or more games. McLean had 10. Luongo had 8. And Luongo could have had a bunch more if the whole situation between the Canucks and Luongo had been handled differently. Then there's a huge tie with 3. Cloutier, Caprice, Schneider, Smith, Hanlon, Miller, Markstrom, Hirsch, Wilson. Markstrom will break that this year. Markstrom will get his 4th year as either starter or backup, depending on what happens with their goaltending this year. But I think the goalie graveyard talk, again, is really right here. And then once Cloutier and Skudra had 2 years together, it looked more stable, even though Skudra gets moved out and Hedberg comes in. Skudra didn't stay because the coach didn't have any confidence in him. I liked Skudra. There were times where I was like, you could probably play Skudra here. You don't have to play Cloutier. Oh, no, it's fine. The Avs are up 6-1. There's not much point. Because the Avs had Cloutier's number. Regular season, Cloutier against the Avs, for whatever reason they get in his head. But this is a long history. 35 goalies on this board, and since the year 2000, the number's been 16. So is there a goalie graveyard in Vancouver? We'll see as this series continues where the actual goalie graveyard might be. I don't really think that Vancouver will end up being the highest, but they might. It might happen that they might end up being the one with the most amount of goaltenders. And I think when you look at it, I think really part of the problem has been, when you look through their history, either they've had a contract dispute with a goaltender or they haven't been willing to commit to a goaltender. Again, I think Demko could be the guy that fixes this. Demko could be a guy that ends up putting up 7, 8, 9 years as a Canucks goaltender if all works out. But that is still an uncertainty. Until a guy comes in and plays in the NHL regularly, it is an uncertainty. So there you go. Vancouver Canucks and their goaltending history. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.